You know, it's my great pleasure right now to introduce to everybody a man who really needs no introduction.
Carl, Dragon King.
I'm not calling the fans geeks. I'm not calling them rednecks, tobacco chewing nothing, because I've done all that myself.
Carl, Dragon King. Carl.
In your dreams, you will see me. Excuse me, please, let's don't talk negatively.
I'm going to win the title, I'm going to keep my money and buy me some good old Tennessee drinking whiskey with it.
Thank you for being such a great husband.
And this is for you, Fannie Mae. Solid gold, baby, just like you and me.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the DragonKingKarl Classic Wrestling Audio Show at WrestlingObserver.com and Figure4Online.com. And this show is available also to the Patreon subscribers at WhenItWasCool.com. Thank you all for joining me here today. It's one of my favorite shows out of our rotation of shows that we do. It's the long-form history of wrestling. And I'm going to try to arrange so there's not so many shows in between. We're going to roll the long-form history of wrestling around a little bit sooner now each time. And this is the 100th episode. We have done 100 episodes slowly and in detail covering the history of wrestling. Now, I don't expect all of you listening to have heard all, this being the 100th part, but if you're interested in listening to this series, if you'll go to whenitwascool.com, under our podcast page tabs, you'll see the long-form history of wrestling. And you can go, several of the early episodes I've combined together, cut out ads and stuff, and put them all together. So some of the early ones are omnibus style, put together podcasts with all the filler cut out of them. And then the others, you listen to the whole series up till now at whenitwascool.com. And I hope you'll do that. The Patreon page at whenitwascool.com is what supports this show, so I hope you will consider doing that. So we are all the way up to 1985. So we're about to begin here on this episode. It's a good jumping on place. In fact, I may put this episode out on my free feed as well, the free feed at When It Was Cool Wrestling, because it's a great jumping on point right here. 1985 is one of the biggest years in wrestling. Coincidentally, this is a peak time for the DragonKingKarl show and When It Was Cool. We're getting two real peak eras at this at the same time. Over on my other show, 1,000 Hours, where we talk about the pioneers of wrestling, we're about to do 1870, which was the biggest year of the pioneer era of wrestling, the year of the Detroit International Tournament. Many huge things happened 1870, and here we are now in the long form, about to start 1985, which is the year with the first WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan's been champion for a year now in WWF. AWA is strong. There's going to be wrestling action figures out later this same year. There's a lot of great stuff going on. The territories are even still relatively strong, with a few exceptions. WWF is certainly making their way through things. The Japan scene is very good. New Japan and All Japan, of course, doing rather well. And we've talked about all this. And again, the whole script for this book comes from my book, DragonKingKarl's 1984-1985 Pro Wrestling Omnibus. Every major event in pro wrestling during the years 1984 and 85. So, I've stressed a lot recently about my Pioneer Era book. That's because it's my latest book. But I hope you'll check this out. This book has been selling remarkably well. We're halfway through the book right now with our long-form history of wrestling. So I hope you'll join us. So let's get into 1985. Let's start first half of the month. That's how we usually do it here. And then we take a mid-show break, come back and do the second half of the month. So January 1985, Hulk Hogan Tours Japan is what I have subtitled this chapter as. And Hulk Hogan, even back the year before in 1984, when he was just won the WWF Championship from Iron Sheik, he still went on these Japanese tours. He still went and lost the IWGP Championship to Antonio Inoki in the summer tournament. Now here we are back in early 1985, and Hogan's going back. So January 1st, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida in Tampa, Florida at the Spartan Sports Center. NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair defeated Pez Whatley. Pez Whatley getting a shot. And Pez Whatley got more shots at the World Heavyweight Championship in his career than you might imagine. Pez was, I guess, the biggest time he was ever a star was down here in Georgia. And as Willie B. heard a little while in Alabama, certainly I think most associated with like the Chattanooga wrestling scene and the Georgia wrestling scene and stuff was Pez Whatley. All right, New Japan Pro Wrestling on the 1st of January 1985 at the Tokyo Dome, Korakuen Hall. Attendance is 3,000 people. Sellout. Naoki Sano defeated Keiji Muto, who's the future Great Muto. I've recently I went to a second-hand store with my wife, and they've got some wrestling DVDs there, some Japanese ones that I've been buying a few of each time I go. And one of them I got is the Jushin Thunder Liger 8-disc career retrospective. So I've got to watch a lot of Naoki Sano recently, who's one of Liger's early foes. And look, here's a guy who, I'm going to be honest with you, I've seen his name for years. I've seen him periodically over the years, but he was a lot better than I think really given any indication for being. Naoki Sano was a pretty solid little wrestling star there. Hirokazu Hata defeated Shinya Hashimoto. Makoto Arakawa beat Kim Sung Hong. Black Tiger and David Morgan defeated Shunji Koshugi and Kichi Yamada. Yes, that's the future Jushin Liger there. And Nooro Sano beat Tato Soshi Goto. And we talked a little bit in the past about this. Einaro Adesanya, he was only in for a brief period of time, so this isn't really like somebody you should be like, hey, who's that? Who is that? Somebody who changed identities in the future? No, he wasn't in for a real long time. Tiger Taguchi pinned Kerry Brown. Hiro Saito and Umanosuke Ueda fought the Cobra, who's George Takano, and Kantaro Hoshino to a double countout. The Strong Machines of Junji Harada and Yang Sunhai defeated Seiji Sakaguchi and King Okamura. Hulk Hogan and the Wild Samoan Samu fought Antonio Inoki and Tatsumi Fujinami to a double DQ when a group of 4 Strong Machine members ran in. So this is the peak of that Strong Machine, the Machines era in Japan. It will eventually relate over here to the United States as well, of course, with Andre the Giant as Giant Machine coming over, and Super Machine as the Masked Superstar coming over, and even Blackjack Mulligan as Big Machine, and others as well. WWF is in Los Angeles, California, the Sports Arena. Attendance 9,000 people. On the 1st, Alexis Smirnoff defeated Tim Shepard. Steve Pardee fought Jack Armstrong to a draw. The Junkyard Dog beat the Iron Sheik. Jimmy Snuka and Tonga Kid beat Roddy Piper and Bob Orton Jr. by DQ. Don Morocco defeated Swede Hansen. WWF Women's Champion Wendy Richter beat Judy Martin. Buddy Rose beat Chief Jay Strongbow. WWF Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine beat Tito Santana by DQ. January 2nd, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida, Miami Beach, Florida, at Killian High School. Sweet Brown Sugar, who's Skip Young, actually defeated the NWA World Champion Ric Flair, but by DQ, of course. He didn't get the championship, but a big win, probably a career win for Skip Young. In Shreveport, Louisiana, at the Irish McNeil's Boys Club, Terry Taylor defeated Buddy Landell to win the Mid-South TV title. WWF is also in Oakland, California, at the Coliseum. Attendance 11,669. So this would have been either earlier or later show than the Los Angeles show. Steve Pardee fought Jerry Monty to a draw. Buddy Rose pinned Chief Jay Strongbow. Don Morocco pinned Sweet Hansen. Ivan Putski pinned Guy Lambert. WWF Women's Champion Wendy Richter pinned Judy Martin. George Wells pinned Alexis Smirnoff. Junkyard Dog beat the Iron Sheik. WWF Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine defeated Tito Santana by DQ, and Jimmy Snuka and Tonga Kid beat Roddy Piper and Bob Orton Jr. by disqualification. On January 3rd, 1985, we have our first of the Saga of Lord Humongous series. Now I know this may seem kind of out of place in the book and here on the show as well. Southeastern was a smaller territory. Even their biggest arena, when sold completely out, that was the only place they could even do 5,000 people in attendance, as they had slacked off using Mobile so much. Mobile, they could have got over 5,000. They could have got 10,000 at Mobile, but as far as their weekly, programs, arenas they ran, Boutwell was the biggest, and it was only 5,000 people at capacity. But I did this deep dive podcast series called Saga of the Lord Humongous. In fact, I have several of these Saga of specials for our Patreon supporters at whenitwascool.com, and this goes through literally every incarnation of the Lord Humongous character. Many different people have played this character. It started out with a guy named Mike Stark, later became here in 1985. This is Jeff Van Camp, but we covered many of the others. And since I already had that timeline for that show, I went ahead and incorporated it wherever it was Humongous appeared. And here, we're talking about the book, DragonKingKarl's 1984-1985 Pro Wrestling Omnibus. Here is the part of the Saga of Lord Humongous series. And so Jeff Van Camp as Humongous is down in Birmingham, Alabama at this time. He's going to be down there until the group becomes Continental Wrestling in 1986, and he's there for a short time thereafter as well. So Southeastern Championship Wrestling, Birmingham, Alabama. Bob Armstrong defeated the Assassin, who is Bob Owens, by DQ. Mr. Olympia, Jerry Stubbs, beat Jimmy Golden by DQ. The Rat Patrol, Johnny Rich and Steve Armstrong, battled Pat and Randy Rose to a no contest. Lord Humongous, here we're talking about Lord Humongous. Jeff Van Camp beat Ricky Gibson. That's Robert Gibson's brother. Arn Anderson beat Pork Chop Cash by DQ. And Scott Armstrong battled Bill Ash to a draw. Now, I want to call everybody's attention to a new show we have at When It Was Cool. It's a free show. Eric Gartland, who is a historian and collector for Southeastern and Continental Wrestling Gulf Coast of memorabilia. He does that show on our network, so hope you'll come by and check. He's several shows in now, reviewing the old Southeastern Championship Wrestling TV shows, so hope you'll check that out. Now, we're still on the 3rd of January, 1985, and we go to Championship Wrestling from Florida in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Coliseum. NWA World Champion Ric Flair defeated Pez Whatley. So he's going back and forth between Pez Whatley and Skip Young here on Ric Flair's tour of Florida. And Florida's still doing okay at this point in time. January 4th, 1985, WWF is in Long Island, New York, at the Nassau Coliseum. They have 7,000 people there. So we have Bret Hart beating Moondog Spot. S.D. Jones beats Moondog Rex, who's Randy Colley. Brutus Beefcake beat Jose Luis Rivera. Blackjack Mulligan, just talked about him. He'll eventually become one of the Machines. He beat A.J. Petrucci. Nikolai Volkov beat Mike Rotundo. Barry Windham fought Paul Orndorff to a double DQ. Andre the Giant and Jimmy Snuka and Tony Atlas beat Big John Studd, Roddy Piper, and Ken Patera by DQ. Now over to Central States, and this is actually St. Louis. Attendance 8,260, so this is a big show for them. Dave Peterson and Marty Jannetty and Mike Bond in a 6-man team defeat Gary Royal, Sheik Abdullah, and T.G. Stone. Ken Timms, the man who trained me in the wrestling business and worked with me. He was the champion of my promotion I promoted. Ken Timms here beats Art Cruz. Bob Brown and Rufus R. Jones defeated Mr. Pogo and Roger Kirby. Wahoo McDaniel defeated Terry Funk. Bob Backlund fought Harley Race to a draw. Kerry Von Erich defeated Buzz Sawyer. NWA World Champion Ric Flair fought Bruiser Brody to a double DQ. Now, on January 5th, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida is in Lakeland, Florida, at the Civic Center. NWA World Champion Ric Flair beat Dutch Mantel. So there's a interesting. I don't know how many times Dutch Mantel challenged for either the AWA or NWA World title over the years. And I'm not sure if I expect that number to be high or low. Like, with the AWA Championship, it was always Jerry Lawler ahead of him in Memphis. In Puerto Rico, maybe. In Alabama, I don't recall him when he came to Southeastern getting a shot. Maybe he did with Flair. But it's interesting. Dutch Mantel I like Dutch Mantel. I grew up watching Dutch Mantel. I've met Dutch Mantel a few times over the years. I like Dutch Mantel. Fan of his. New Japan Pro Wrestling was in Ishizaki, Japan on January 5th, 1985. The attendance was 5,600. Kichi Yamada. Yes, Jushin Liger beat Keiji Muda. Yes, the great Muda. Kim Sung-hong pinned Hirokazu Hata. David Morgan pinned Nakao Sano. Samula pinned Makoto Arakawa. Honoro Adesanya pinned Tetsu Oshigoto. Umanosuke Oida and Hiro Saito beat Kentaro Hoshino and Shunji Koshugi. Seiji Sakaguchi and Kingo Kimura beat the Strong Machines. In this case, it is Junji Harada and Yang Sung-hai by DQ. King Kong Bundy pinned Tiger Taguchi. King Kong Bundy's been wrestling a lot of places. He was recently wrestling in Memphis, in the AWA, and now here he is on a tour of Japan. Antonio Inoki and Tatsumi Fujinami and the Cobra, George Takano, defeated Hulk Hogan, Kerry Brown, and the Black Tiger. Also on January 5th, 1985, WWF is in Boston, Massachusetts. The Boston Garden attendance is 16,425 people. That's a sellout. Bret Hart beat Pete Doherty. Brutus Beefcake beat Sweet Hansen. WWF World Tag Team Champions, North-South Connection of Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch beat the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Tito Santana beat Greg Valentine. Don Morocco beat S.D. Jones. Blackjack Mulligan beat David Schultz. The Heenan family of Big John Studd and Ken Patera beat Andre the Giant and Junkyard Dog by DQ. January 6, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida is in Orlando, Florida at the Eddie Graham Sports Complex. And Brian Blair defeated Jesse Barr to win the Florida title. And that title change was apparently repeated also on the 8th in Tampa, Florida. Also on the 6th of January 1985, WWF is in Columbus, Georgia at the Ohio Center. Columbus, Ohio at the Ohio Center. Attendance 5,500. Bret Hart pinned Buddy Rose. Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker fought Les Thornton to a draw. David Sammartino pinned the Spoiler, Don Jardine. Bob Orton Jr. pinned Ivan Putski. Tito Santana defeated Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine by countout. Women's Champion Wendy Richter beat Judy Martin. Big John Studd and Ken Patera defeated the team of Andre the Giant and Blackjack Mulligan by DQ. WWF was also in East Rutherford, New Jersey. The Meadowlands attended 16,778 here on January the 6th, 1985. So you see, WWF is doing huge business everywhere. The machine is definitely running. This Meadowlands show had Jimmy Snuka and Jose Luis Rivera beating Don Morocco and Johnny Roz. Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik beat Salvatore Bellomo and S.D. Jones. Jack and Jerry Briscoe beat Brutus Beefcake and Johnny V, who is Johnny Valiant, of course. Tony Atlas and George Wells beat the Moondogs, Rex and Spot. Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo fought the WWF World Tag Team Champions, North-South Connection, Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch to a draw. Paul Orndorff pinned the Junkyard Dog. Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo won a 10-man, $50,000 Battle Royal by last eliminating Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik. Jim Crockett Promotions has a big show in Greensboro, North Carolina, at the Coliseum here on January 6th. 5,879 people are there for Kickoff 85. Steve Casey defeated Black Bart. Rick Harris recently, the dearly departed Rick Harris. Black Bart passed away recently from cancer, and I certainly want to remember how I liked Black Bart. I was a big fan of the various Rick Harris characters over the years. Cowboy Lang defeated Lord Littlebrook. Charlie Brown from out of town, that big Jimmy Valiant, teamed up with the Assassin 1, Jody Hamilton, and Buzz Tyler to beat superstar Billy Graham, Ron Bass, and J.J. Dillon. NWA TV champion Tully Blanchard beat Dick Slater in the Texas Death Match. Magnum TA beat NWA US champion Wahoo McDaniel in a non-title match. The NWA World Tag Team Champions at this point were Dusty Rhodes and Manny Fernandez, and they beat the reigning AWA World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal. So you had AWA versus NWA champions here. Don Kernodle defeated Ivan Koloff in a lights out steel cage match. NWA World Champion Ric Flair defeated Harley Race. And Magnum TA won a 20-man, $50,000 Battle Royal by last eliminating Wahoo McDaniel. January the 7th, 1985, another Saga of the Lord Humongous entry here. Southeastern Championship Wrestling, Birmingham, Alabama. Jimmy Golden beat Austin Idol by DQ. Lord Humongous, Jeff Van Camp, beat Porkchop Cash. Bob Armstrong beat the Assassin, Bob Owens. Rat Patrol, Johnny Rich and Steve Armstrong beat Pat and Randy Rose for the NWA Southeastern Tag Team titles. Mr. Olympia, Jerry Stubbs, battled Arn Anderson to a draw. Arn Anderson had recently been working as Super Olympia down there. Scott Armstrong beat Bill Ash. Now, CWA, Jerry Jarrett's in Memphis, Tennessee at the Mid-South Coliseum. And their attendance is under 5,000, but we do have a title change. It's the interns, Don Bass and Roger Smith, battled the Dirty White Boys, Lynn Denton and Tony Anthony, to a no contest. And as a result of this match, the title was declared vacant. Now, also on January 7th, 1985, New Japan Pro Wrestling has a show in Toda, Japan. Attendance 2,200 people. And again, this is kind of under our threshold of what we include, but there are several major names on this show, and I think, and Hulk Hogan's on this tour too. Kichi Yamada pinned Hirokazu Hata. Makoto Arakawa pinned Shinya Hashimoto. Shunji Koshugi defeated Naoki Sano. Hiro Saito beat David Morgan. Onoro Adesoni beat Tatsuoshi Goto. Struggling with Tadasoshi, and that one's tripping me up today. Tiger Taguchi defeated Umanasuke Ueda by DQ. Strong Machines, Junji Harada and Yang Sung-ha defeated Kingo Kimura and Kim Soo-hong. King Kong Bundy and Kerry Brown teamed together to beat Seiji Sakaguchi and Kentaro Hoshino. Antonio Inoki and Tatsumi Fujinami and the Cobra teamed together to beat Hulk Hogan, Samula, and the Black Tiger. All right. January the 8th, 1985, the AWA is in Salt Lake City, Utah. The attendance, 8,987 people are there. Brad Reagan's beat Sheik Adnan LKC by countout. Nick Botwinkle beat Kurt Hennig. The Fabulous Ones, Steve Kern, Stan Lane, and Baron Von Raschke beat the Road Warriors with Paul Ellering. Kurt Hennig teamed with his father, Larry Hennig, to beat Bruiser Brody and Sheik Adnan LKC. Jim Garvin beat the AWA World Champion Rick Martel by DQ. I love this 1985 era Rick Martel AWA World Champion. Like, to me, that was really, I don't know, for me, I didn't watch AWA Wrestling week to week. I couldn't get it on television here. So I followed it in the magazines, and so, obviously the Remco action figures come out later. So I was big. Rick Martel is AWA champion. He was kind of at that peak of my childhood wrestling fandom as AWA champion. January 9th, 1985, Jim Crockett Promotions, NWA's in Raleigh, North Carolina to Dorton Arena. Dusty Rhodes battled Harley Race to a double countout in an NWA World Title #1 Contenders match. On January 10th, 1985, the AWA is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Attendance of 5,628. So you can see here, look, AWA 1985, early 1985, still rather strong. I mean, WWF is not just, they came in, took so many of their people from Hulk Hogan to, not immediately, but were most recognized with, Hulk Hogan's most recognized with AWA, David Schultz, Mean Gene Okerlund, and Ken Patera, and so many others. But they're still strong. They're still hanging in there. On this Winnipeg show, this was a Pro Wrestling USA TV taping. High Flyers, Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell beat Brian Jewell and Rob Rechsteiner. Yes, this was the early days of one Rob Rechsteiner, early on, doing TV job work for the Pro Wrestling USA show. Jerry Blackwell and Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell beat Paul Ellering and the Road Warriors. Jimmy Garvin beat John Nord by DQ. Dino Bravo beat Brian Jewell. I like John Nord as a kid. I don't know why. I like the Nord the Barbarian. Every time I would read his name and the results and on the aftermags, I'd think, man, I want to see this Nord the Barbarian. And then I would see photos of him from when he was in Mid-South, or I would see later photos of him when he was in Mid-South and stuff. So kind of interesting. One John Nord here. Jimmy Garvin, anyway, beat him by DQ. Dino Bravo beat Brian Jewell. AWA World Tag Team Champions. The Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, defeated Brad Reagans and Rick Phoebe. Kurt Hennigpin, Rob Rechsteiner. Jerry Blackwell and Baron Von Raschke beat Rick Renslow and Dave Wagner. And Sergeant Slaughter defeated Mr. Saito by DQ. So Sergeant Slaughter now out of the WWF due to their disagreements they had over there. All right, January 11th, 1985, WWF is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Civic Arena, attendance 5,500. Salvatore Bellomo pinned Jimmy Jackson. George Wells beat Steve Lombardi. Bob Orton Jr. beat Rick McGraw. The Spoiler, Don Jardine, fought Bret Hart to a draw. Don Morocco beat Sweet Hansen. David Sammartino beat Brutus Beefcake. The WWF World Tag Team Champions, North-South Connection, of Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch beat Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Jimmy Snuka and Tony Atlas beat Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff in a Texas Tornado match. All right, January 12th, 1985, Saga of the Lord Humongous. This is a TV show now from Southeastern Championship Wrestling, so at some point in time, Aaron Gartland will get around to reviewing this show on his Southeastern Championship Wrestling Action News podcast, available at When It Was Cool. So the hosts of this show were Charlie Platt and Rick Stewart. Ric Flair cuts a promo on Bob Armstrong. The Rat Patrol, who are the Southeastern Tag Team Champions, Johnny Rich and Scott Armstrong, they beat the Executioners, two just masked enhancement guys. Austin Idol promo, and this is showing where he had gotten attacked. Ron Fuller was managing at this point and wearing a tuxedo and top hat. He had kept carrying this cane with him, his walking cane, and Austin Idol had gotten that jabbed in his throat in the previous weeks. Angles. All right, as far as matches on this TV show, we had, let's see here. I'm going to read between the... So it's a big elimination match. Jimmy Golden, Arn Anderson, Bill Ash, and Mr. Olympia, Jerry Stubbs, and Pork Chop Cash, and Les Freeman. So there's a big elimination match there. This is a singles match. The last person in is the winner. So Mr. Olympia won, last eliminating Jimmy Golden. And Bob Armstrong, who's the reigning Continental Champion at this point in time, battled the Assassin, who was, in fact, Bob Owens, not anybody else. If you've heard it's Randy Barber or somebody else, is wrong. It's Bob Owens, that's from Ron Fuller himself. He was the Assassin here in 1985 Southeastern Wrestling. He goes to a double pin situation with Bob Armstrong, so the Continental title's held up. Of course, Bob gets it back, but they hold it up for this particular show. WWF, Detroit, Michigan, Cobo Arena, 12,000 people sell out. This is the first sellout in the arena in more than 10 years at Cobo Hall. We had Bret Hart beating Rene Goulet. Blackjack Mulligan beat Mr. Fuji. Wendy Richter beat Judy Martin. Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo defeated Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. Andre the Giant Junkyard Dog fought Ken Patera and Big John Studd to a draw. Tito Santana defeated WWF Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine by countout. WWF is also in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the Spectrum. Attendance around 14,000. And this again was with a TV taping. Rick McGraw beat Johnny Roz. David Schultz beat Dave Barbie. The Spoiler, Don Jardine, fought George Wells to a draw. Brutus Beefcake beat Salvatore Bellomo. David Sammartino defeated Paul Orndorff by DQ. WWF World Tag Team Champions, North-South Connection, Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch beat Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Don Morocco beat Swede Hansen. Roddy Piper and Bob Orton Jr. fought Jimmy Snuka and Tony Atlas to a double countout. On January 13th, 1985, AWA is in Chicago. It's an afternoon show. Brad Reagans beat Steve Regal. Mr. Saito beat Kurt Hennig. Nick Bockwinkel beat Baron von Raschke. The AWA World Tag Team Champions, Road Warriors, beat the Fabulous Ones, Steve Kern and Stan Lane. Jerry Blackwell and Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell beat Sheik Adnan LKC, Bruiser Brody, and Superstar Billy Graham. Jimmy Garvin defeated AWA World Champion Rick Martel by DQ. And I guess, look, Jimmy Garvin and Rick Martel's feud for the AWA World title is probably the one Martel's most remembered for, aside from that loss of the title to Stan Hansen later on. The Martel-Garvin feud's probably the highlight of that run. Now, AWA is also in St. Paul at the Civic Center later that evening, attendance 11,000. Reagans beat Steve Regal. John Nord beat Jimmy Doo. Baron von Raschke wrestled Billy Robinson to a time limit draw. Mr. Saito and Nick Bockwinkel beat Kurt Hennig and Larry Hennig by DQ. The High Flyers, Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell beat Sheik Adnan LKC. And the Masked Superstar, who in this case was in fact Bill Eadie. The Crusher and the Fabulous Ones beat Paul Ellering and the Road Warriors. Jerry Blackwell beat King Kong Bundy by countout in a no DQ match. And Sergeant Slaughter made his AWA debut by being handcuffed to Sheik Adnan LKC during the match. And Jimmy Garvin beat AWA World Champion Rick Martel by DQ. So it's interesting, Sergeant Slaughter's on that St. Paul show, but not the Chicago show. I don't know. WWF's in Phoenix, Arizona, Veterans Memorial, attendance 6,000. Dick Murdoch beat S.D. Jones. Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine beat Tito Santana. WWF Women's Champion Wendy Richter beat Judy Martin. And WWF Champion Hulk Hogan beat the Iron Sheik. And I have a DragonKingKarl note for this date. Sergeant Slaughter, Robert Ramos, was now free from WWF control of his image and likeness. However, it would still be about a year before Hasbro G.I. Joe action figure saw the light of day. Near the end of 1985, the Hasbro Toy Company would begin taking mail-in orders for the Sergeant Slaughter action figure, but it would not begin shipping until early 1986. Likewise, a version of Sergeant Slaughter would be packaged with the Triple T tank toy, which also hit shelves in 1986. All right, the January 14th, 1985, Saga Lord Humongous, Birmingham, Alabama. Jimmy Gold and Arn Anderson teamed together to beat Mr. Olympia and Austin Idol by DQ. Bob Armstrong and Porkchop Cash beat the Assassin and Lord Humongous. Scott Armstrong battled Bill Ash to a draw. Rat Patrol, Johnny Rich, Steve Armstrong beat Pat and Randy Rose. And Arn Anderson won a battle royal. So this would have been a Monday night, so that means up in Memphis, something that's going on also. CWA Jerry Jarrett, Memphis, Tennessee, to Mid-South Coliseum. The interns, Don Bass and Roger Smith, beat the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, to win the vacant Southern Tag Team titles. And finally, for the first half of the show, January 15th, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida is in Tampa at the Spartan Sports Center. NWA World Champion Ric Flair defeated Pez Whatley by DQ. All right, so when we come back after this, we'll talk. Look, WWF and AWA are holding the big shows this month, but we'll have something also from Crockett Promotions, and we'll see if some of these promotions we haven't heard from yet, like World Class, Portland, see what they're up to, Mexico as well, right after this. Hey everybody, this is Carl Stern from WhenItWasCool.com. I'm here to tell you about my new book, now available, DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of professional wrestling. Pro wrestling didn't start with Frank Gotch. He didn't just appear out of the void to bring us entertainment-style professional wrestling. No, it was built on a legacy some 70 to 80 years old. That's what I'm going to talk to you about, an era of wrestling in America seldom ever discussed, never before in this detail. I have put 700 pages of information about the pioneers of professional wrestling, like William Muldoon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, Professor Theobald Bauer, Clarence Whistler, William Miller, and so many more. Maybe some names you've never heard of before, maybe some you've only heard in passing. I will tell you the origins and evolution. Now available, Amazon.com, whenitwascool.com. All right, we're back, and thank you all very much for joining us here. And I want to remind you that, while most of the push, as you just heard, has been for my DragonKingKarl Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus book, I hope you'll also pick up the one we're talking about on this episode, which is DragonKingKarl's 1984-1985 Pro Wrestling Omnibus. Every major event in pro wrestling in 1984 and 1985. So this book's almost 700 pages as well. You can pick it up from Amazon. If you read books on Kindle, it's available as Kindle Unlimited. If you don't read Kindle and you just want an electronic version of this, a PDF version, you can get off the $10 level of my Patreon. In fact, you get all three of my books, the Pioneer Era Omnibus, the 84-85 book, and the 1983 book, all of those on the $10 level. Get the PDF, so check that out. All right, so we're going to go now to January 16th, 1985. Find out what the rest of January of 85 has for us. Mid-South Wrestling in Shreveport, Louisiana at the Irish McNeil's Boys Club. Of course, Mid-South Wrestling here. Their TV tapings done there. Ted DiBiase defeated Brad Armstrong to win the North American title. It's interesting. Brad Armstrong here, to most outside observers, he kind of peaks 85. To us who really followed the career of Brad, 86 was a great year. He was in Continental. He feuded with Jerry Stubbs. He had some good stuff there. But Brad has been pushed to the national championship in Georgia. He's been pushed to the North American championship and for Bill Watts, Mid-South. He's done well in Southeastern and Georgia, but on the national scene, he just couldn't follow up on this strong start. And Brad Armstrong, one of the best in-ring wrestlers ever. It's really too bad. Brad's career should have been much more than it was. So also January 16th, 85, Championship Wrestling from Florida, Tampa, Florida TV taping. NWA World Champion Ric Flair beat Jack Hart. Yes, Barry Horowitz under one of his alternate wrestling names. January 17th, 1985, WWF's in Dallas, Texas at the State Fair Arena and have WWF Champion Hulk Hogan beat the Iron Sheik there. Also on the 17th, AWA was in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Showboat Sports Pavilion, site where many shows would be taped for AWA television over the rest of the 1980s. But here we have another Garvin-Martel match, and Jimmy Garvin beats Rick Martel by DQ this time. Now, Crockett's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the Civic Arena. 1,600 people there. NWA World Champion Ric Flair beat Tommy Rich. And look, a 1985 Ric Flair-Tommy Rich match would probably have been pretty good. January 18th, 1985, Jim Crockett Promotions, Richmond, Virginia Coliseum, attendance 8,000 people. Sam Houston beat Jeff Sword. Johnny Weaver beat Doug Vines. Nikita Koloff beat Mike Davis. Magnum TA beat Kareem Muhammad. Superstar Billy Graham and the Barbarian beat Dick Slater in the Assassin, this being Jody Hamilton. NWA TV champion Tully Blanchard defeated Dusty Rhodes by reverse decision. U.S. champion Wahoo McDaniel defeated world champion Ric Flair by DQ. January 19th, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida in Sarasota, Florida at the Robarts Arena. NWA World Champion Ric Flair beat Dutch Mantel by DQ. All right, also on the 19th, WWF's in Indianapolis, Indiana, Convention Expo Center. Attendance 7,000 people. Jerry Valiant beat Bobby Bold Eagle. Tony Atlas beat Moondog Spot. Moondog Rex beat Johnny Starr. Roddy Popper beat George Wells. Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo beat the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. WWF Women's Champion Wendy Richter beat Judy Martin. WWF Champion Hulk Hogan beat Paul Orndorff by DQ. Now, WWF is also in Chicago the same day. And they draw 9,832, which is very close to what AWA drew there as well. So this is WWF's card. They had S.D. Jones beating Rene Goulet. Bret Hart beating Alexis Smirnoff. The Spoiler, Don Jardine, defeated Rick McGraw. Jimmy Snuka beat Bob Orton Jr. Brutus Beefcake beat Ivan Putski. Tito Santana beat WWF Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine by DQ. Ken Patera and Big John Studd beat Andre the Giant and Junkyard Dog by DQ. Now, on January 20th, 1985, UWA, Mexican promotion, is in Naucalpan at the Torreo de Cuatro Caminos Stadium. Dos Caras defeated Stan Hansen by DQ. So Stan Hansen did periodically go to Mexico as well. Most associated, of course, with Japan. I'm working my way through a Stan Hansen disc now as well from that same second-hand shop. I got the Jushin Liger disc from. I got a Stan Hansen, I think it's 8-disc set too. Just finished this one last night. Had some early 80s stuff against Antonio Inoki and Andre the Giant. Just real good stuff. January 21st, 1985, WWF is at Madison Square Garden in New York City. So this is our big monthly Madison Square Garden show. On our regular episodes of the DragonKingKarl Classic Wrestling Audio Show, we often include a segment called Wrestling History at Madison Square Garden. We're back in the 1930s on it. So here we are in 1985. Their big show of the month. What happened? 16,000 people are in attendance to see Roddy Piper and Bob Orton Jr. beat Junkyard Dog and Jimmy Snuka in a Texas Tornado match. Tito Santana beat Greg Valentine by countout. Andre the Giant beat Ken Patera by DQ. Big John Studd beat George Wells. Blackjack Mulligan defeated Moondog Spot. Don Morocco beat Swede Hansen. The Spoiler, Don Jardine beat Rick McGraw. Bret Hart beat Rene Goulet. Jim Neidhart defeated Tony Gurria. Moondog Rex beat Terry Gibbs. WWF's also in Hartford, Connecticut on the same date. The Civic Center, 8,000 people. Jose Luis Rivera fought Charlie Fulton to a draw. David Schultz beat S.D. Jones. Johnny V, who's Johnny Valiant, of course, beat Salvatore Bellomo. Tony Atlas beat Brutus Beefcake by DQ. Paul Orndorff beat Ivan Putski. WWF Champion Hulk Hogan beat Nikolai Volkov. Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo defeated the WWF World Tag Team Champions. The North-South Connection, Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch, to win the title. So here in Hartford, Connecticut, on January the 21st, 1985, that is when Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo become WWF World Tag Team Champions. All right, so I always liked Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo as WWF champs. The same date, Mid-South Coliseum, New Orleans, Louisiana, Municipal Auditorium, 8,000 people. Ted DiBiase and Steve Williams, one of my favorite teams, defeated Jim Duggan and Terry Gordy in a Texas Tornado match. Kerry Von Erich battled Chris Adams to a draw. Butch Reed defeated One Man Gang. Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson beat the Midnight Express, Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton. What a good show this is. Oh my gosh, these are just good shows here. Kamala beat Billy Jack Haynes. Hector and Chavo Guerrero beat the Fantastics. Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers. Iceman King Parsons beat Jack Victory. And Jake Roberts defeated Terry Daniels. Well, man, take me to that card right there tonight. That's what I want in wrestling right there. Now, on this same date, milestone, very important event happened January the 21st, 1985, besides this big show here in Madison Square Garden in the good Mid-South show. Unfortunately, it's a major sad day for pro wrestling. Championship Wrestling from Florida owner, promoter, longtime pro wrestler Eddie Graham died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Tampa, Florida at the age of 55. Sadly, 3 generations of Eddie Gilbert's family would die by suicide, including his grandson in December of 2010 and his son, wrestler Mike Graham, in October of 2012. The Tampa newspaper reported at the time that, quote, Graham shot himself Sunday and died the next day. A family friend said he was despondent and troubled. He was a key figure in the growth and popularity of professional wrestling. Graham, age 55, was president of the Championship Wrestling from Florida Incorporated, which gained national fame through its highly rated television matches. Police said Graham apparently shot himself at his home. Graham, who had the image of a man in a relentless and often brutal pursuit of victory in the ring, was also known for his compassion and benevolence beyond it. If you're a loved one need immediate assistance in preventing suicide. In the United States, you can now dial 988 on any phone for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So very sad day, I'm afraid. Also on that same date, the 21st, January 21st, 1985, Jim Crockett's NWA and the AWA were together in Baltimore, Maryland, at the Civic Center. Attendance was 5,600 people. Kurt Hennig beat Doug Summers. Chick Donovan beat Larry Sharp. Ron Starr beat the Italian Stallion. Brian Adidas fought Jim Brunzell to a draw. Ron Ritchie beat Rip Rogers. The NWA National Champion Ron Garvin beat Bob Roop. NWA National Tag Team Champions Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt Patterson beat the AWA World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, by DQ. Bob Backlund defeated Masked Superstar Bill Eadie by DQ. Sergeant Slaughter and Tommy Rich defeated Bill and Scott Irwin. Bob Backlund and Sergeant Slaughter won a 12-team $100,000 Battle Royal. All right, the next day, January 22nd, 1985, another Pro Wrestling USA show. This one from Baltimore, Maryland. Civic Center, 5,600 people. So you know it's going to be tons of enhancement job matches here. Kurt Hennig beats Doug Summers. Chick Donovan beats Larry Sharp. Ron Starr beats the Italian Stallion. Brian Adidas battled Jim Brunzell to a draw. Rod Ritchie beat Rip Rogers. Sounds very much like the Baltimore show the night before, right? Ronnie Garvin beats Bob Roop. Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt Patterson beat the AWA World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, by DQ. Bob Backlund beats the Masked Superstar by DQ. Sergeant Slaughter Tommy Rich beats the Long Riders. Bob Backlund and Sergeant Slaughter win a tag team match. Let's go to January 23rd, 1985. Championship Wrestling from Florida, Tampa, Florida. Sportatorium TV taping. Rick Rude defeated the Floridas. There's two Southern championships at this time, Florida and Memphis. The Florida's Southern champion, Rick Rude beat Rick Rude beat the champion Pez Whatley to win the title. January 24th, 1985, WWF St. Louis, Missouri Arena. Attendance, 10,593 people, a sellout. Tony Gurria beat Steve Lombardi. Swede Hansen defeated Terry Gibbs. Don Morocco beat S.D. Jones. Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker beat Jerry Valiant. Ivan Putski defeated Moondog Rex, Randy Cully. WWF Women's Champion Wendy Richter defeated Judy Martin. Roddy Piper and Bob Orton Jr. defeated Jimmy Snuka and Junkyard Dog. Tito Santana beat Intercontinental Champion Greg Valentine by DQ. Paul Orndorff beat WWF Champion Hulk Hogan by DQ. And we talked about this, I think, on the last show, but the haircutting angle between Andre the Giant, who was getting his haircut by Big John Studd, and Ken Patera, aired on this date, January 24th, 1985. It had actually occurred on a TV taping back in November of 84. We talked about that then. January 25th, 1985, Central States, St. Louis, Missouri. Attendance 10,806. Marty Jannetty and Art Cruz beat Sheik Abdullah and Gary Royal. Rufus R. Jones beat The Outlaw. Candy Devine defeated Diane Van Hoffman. Dick the Bruiser and Bob Brown beat Ken Timms and Mr. Pogo. Terry Funk beat Wahoo McDaniel in a Texas Death Match. Harley Race beat Jerry Blackwell. Bruiser Brody beat Kamala by DQ. And NWA World Champion Ric Flair beat Kerry Von Erich in a no DQ match. January 26, 1985, WWF, Cincinnati, Ohio, Riverfront Coliseum. Attendance 8,000 people. Nikolai Volkov beat Pat Patterson. Ivan Putski beat Brutus Beefcake by DQ. Bob Orton Jr. beat Steve Lombardi. Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker beat Les Thornton. The Iron Sheik then turned around and beat Mr. Wrestling 2. Junkyard Dog and Ivan Putski beat Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff in a Texas Tornado match. Now we go down to Mexico. Haven't had a lot of Mexican results on this show, but we got one here for the 27th, January 27th, 1985. UWA Mexico, the 10th anniversary show. Naucalpan at El Toreo. The UWA welterweight champion, Blue Panther, beat Codobarde II. UWA middleweight champion, El Satanico, beat Super Astro. UWA light heavyweight champion, Fishman, battled Mono Negro to a double countout. WWF light heavyweight champion, Villano III, beat El Signo. El Connect and Dos Caras beat Babyface and Stan Hansen. So Stan Hansen down there for that big Toreo show. Also, Playboy Betty Rose is put on trial by the IRS for tax evasion here, January 27th, 1985. All right, January 28th, 1985. This will be a Monday night. And we're going to go to World Class. Haven't heard a lot out of World Class on this episode either, but we have World Class Star Wars shows in Fort Worth, Texas, at the Convention Center, drawing 7,400 people. Billy Jack Haynes beat Kelly Kiniski. The Midnight Express of Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey beat the Fantastics, Tommy Rogers, Bobby Fulton. Kerry Von Erich beat Kamala by DQ. One Man Gang beat Jose Lothario. Kevin Von Erich beat Rip Oliver. Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez, and Jake Roberts beat the Fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes, Buddy Roberts, and Terry Gordy. And Mike, Kevin, and Kerry Von Erich beat Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez, and Jake Roberts. And man, this would have been a good show to have seen. Certainly World Class was still strong at this point, but you could see there's the elements are there. I mean, the Freebirds, this ain't the Freebirds from all the great stuff you remember. This is Freebirds having gone to WWF, basically got fired or frozen out and left and came back. Now, 85, 86 would have some good stuff still, but World Class is not evolving, and the Von Erichs are self-destructing, and so the World Class, while it's not on its downfall yet, man, it's approaching it. Now, on this January 28th, 85, we're CWA, Jerry Jarrett's in Memphis, Tennessee, Mid-South Coliseum, drawing 5,000 people, so it's half a house there. Tojo Yamamoto and Johnny Wilhoit beat Joe Lightfoot and Larry Hager by DQ. Johnny Wilhoit beat Kevin Kelly. Buck Zumhoff went to a draw with Lanny Poffo. Plowboy Frazier, yes, Stan Frazier, your later Uncle Elmer, beat both Brad and Bart, who wrestled under the name Mark here, Batten, in a handicap match. Steve Constance and Tim Ashley beat the Nightmares, Ken Wayne and Danny Davis by DQ. Randy Savage battled Adrian Street to a double DQ. That Randy Savage-Adrian Street feud up there was really interesting. This was before I really got to see and get into Adrian Street quite well. And this was before the national rise of Randy Savage. But their stuff in Memphis was actually very good stuff. The Dirty White Boys, Lynn Ditton and Tony Anthony, beat the Terminators and Jimmy Hart in a DQ in a handicap match. I don't know who the Terminators were here. Jimmy Valiant beat Mid-America champion Mike Sharp by DQ. Southern champion Jerry Lawler battled Eddie Gilbert to a no contest in a Texas death match. As a result, the title was held up. Southern Tag Team Champions, the Interns, Don Bass and Roger Smith, battled the Fabulous Ones, Steve Kern and Stan Lane, to a double DQ. Now, I have here also another Saga of the Lord Humongous. So, Southeasterns in Birmingham at Boutwell Auditorium. Jimmy Gold and Arn Anderson, Lord Humongous, Jeff Van Camp, and the Assassin Bob Owens defeat Bob Armstrong, Austin Idol, and Pork Chop Cash in a handicap match. I forgot they got this many weeks out of Bob Owens as the fake assassin. Ron was known for doing this. He would put a mask on a guy, bring him in, call him something like the Assassin or the Superstar or something. And there would be a more famous version of that same person out there. Jerry Jarrett did this a lot. And so, he had his world famous assassin down there, and it was actually just enhancement wrestler Bob Owens. He was there for longer than I thought. Steve Armstrong beat Pat Rose. Johnny Rich battled Randy Rose to a no contest. Bill Ash beat Jason Walker. And Scott Armstrong beat Randy Barber. January 29th, 1985, Championship Wrestling from Florida at Tampa, Florida, Spartan Sports Center. Pez Watley beat the Florida champion Rick Rude by DQ. January 30th, 1985, Antonio Inoki suffers a rare pinfall loss in a six-man tag team match. King Kong Bundy pins him. King Kong Bundy and the Wild Samoans, Samula, and Abdullah the Butcher defeated Antonio Inoki, Seiji Sakaguchi, and Tatsumi Fujinami, again with Inoki taking the pin. Now, the AWA is in San Francisco, California, at the Cow Palace. 5,300 people there. Pat Barrett battled Guy Lambert to a draw. Sergeant Slaughter beat Nick Bockwinkel. AWA World Champion Rick Martel beat Jim Garvin. Jerry Blackwell defeated the Masked Superstar in a Lights Out match. Baron von Raschke and Kurt Larry Hennig beat the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering. Now, finally, the last day of the month, January 31st, 1985, WWF is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Stadium Arena, attendance 8,000 people. Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker beat Rene Goulet. Bret Hart fought Jim Neidhart to a draw. Ivan Putski defeated the Spoiler Don Jardine. Jackie Jerry Briscoe beat Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch. And the Junkyard Dog beat Paul Orndorff by DQ. Now, our final note we got for this month, and again, this comes from DragonKingKarl's 1984-1985 Pro Wrestling Omnibus. Every major event that happened in pro wrestling in 1984-1985. You can get this book off of Amazon. PDF version off of our Patreon. Hope you'll check that out. It's New Japan Pro Wrestling. They're in Funabayashi, Japan. Attendance 2,800 people. Have all the results here because we've got a lot of names on it. So this was beyond our 5,000 threshold. But Hirokazu Hata beat Masahiro Chono. Naoki Sano and Kiji Muto defeated Toshi Goto and Kim Sung Hong. Ananaro Antasano beat Makoto Arakawa. Black Tiger beat Kichi Yamada. Seiji Sakaguchi beat Kerry Brown. Cobra, George Takano and Shunji Takano, his brother, and Kentaro Hoshino fought the Strong Machines, Junji Harada and Yang Suhai and Hiro Saito to a double countout. King Kong Bundy beat Tiger Taguchi. Tatsumi Fujinami beat Umanosuke Ueda. And Hulk Hogan and Samuel of the Samoans beat the IWGP champion Antonio Inoki and Kingo Kimura. And so that wraps up your January 1985 in pro wrestling history. Hope you will all check us out over at whenitwascool.com. Become a Patreon supporter. We're really pushing our Patreon this month. We have over 2,000, approaching 3,000 shows in our archive. You can go there now and get all kinds of stuff. We've done so many series on the history of pro wrestling. We're about to do our 100th installment into the long-form history of pro wrestling. I guess actually that was just then our 100th installment. So we've reached now 100 on long-form history of pro wrestling. We do the pioneer stuff, the Pioneers of Wrestling with the 1,000 Hours podcast in my books as well. So check all those out at whenitwascool.com. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll see you here again soon with another show.
Whenitwascool.com is your source for the best in retro pop culture. When It Was Cool features articles and podcasts on retro TV and movies, toys, action figures, pro wrestling, food, video games, and more. Hit the Patreon button to support us and get instant access to hundreds of premium podcasts and features. Family friendly and fun. Whenitwascool.com.